Welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, swap sea stories, and explore our connection to the big blue. I'm your host, Kara Muzia. Let's dive into today's episode. Have you heard about my free program, Back to Nature? Getting outside is vital to our health and the health of our planet. The cool part is, to reap the benefits, you only need a few minutes a day. This course is designed to be fun and easy to do, and perhaps spark an adventure or two. Click the link in the show notes to get started today, or visit karagracemuzia.com. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lubbers. Welcome to today's show. Question: what do you call an alligator in a vest? An investigator. What do you call an alligator who uses a GPS? A navigator. It's funny how we can start off in life thinking that we're going to do one thing and end up pivoting to something totally different. Today's guest is Eve Samples, Executive Director of Friends of the Everglades. In this episode, we dive into a myriad of topics, from career shifts to what one spark of activism can mean for a community. Eve shares the legacy of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, the woman who helped the world see the Everglades as more than just a swamp. She shares how her career pivoted from newsroom deadlines to leading grassroots efforts in the fight for clean water. Plus, we break down the Rescue the River of Grass campaign and what it means for the future of South Florida's waterways. This episode in particular is near and dear to my heart because we explore the history of the waters of where I live and how greatly and very intentionally they've been impacted. Please enjoy. Eve, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to start off with your story before we dive into the story of the Everglades. And I really love that you made this shift from journalism into the nonprofit sector. Could you share how you made that leap and really what that was like for you?
Sure. I worked for a journalist for 20 years, working in daily newspapers, started out in Pittsburgh at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and then came back to my native Florida to work at the Fort Pierce Tribune and later the Palm Beach Post, and went on to do some statewide work for the USA Today network in Florida. And during the last 10 of those 20 years, I wrote quite a bit about the environmental crisis plaguing my home community here in Stuart, Florida, namely toxic algae stemming from Lake Okeechobee discharges. The St. Lucie River's been artificially connected to Lake Okeechobee, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that. So that topic really tugged at my heart at the time. My son was 3 or 4 years old when I started really digging in and writing about this topic regularly. And I also noticed that readers in our community responded with such passion, and it made me motivated to move my career in a direction that allowed me to be more involved on the front lines of change. So as a journalist, I was observing. I was an opinion columnist for some time, so I was able to interject my opinion or maybe write an editorial calling for a solution. But the role that I'm in now allows me to be on the front lines. And in late 2019 was when I learned Friends of the Everglades, the organization I work for, was looking for an executive director. And I learned that Friends of the Everglades was founded by Marjory Stoneman Douglas, who's an incredible environmental hero in Florida history, one of the most important historical figures overall in Florida history. And I knew a bit about Marjory from growing up in Florida, but as I really dug into her past, I became just absolutely captivated with the person she was. And she too was a journalist, and then transitioned to be an advocate. So there was some parallel path there that felt very meaningful to me. So in early 2020, I took the job as executive director here at Friends of the Everglades, and we've got a great history of creating positive change for the environment in Florida.
Yes, you do. Was there a specific incident or story that really prompted you to look closer at the waterways in the river?
It was 2013. I remember it pretty well. So my son was 4 or 5, and he was going to attend a summer camp along the Indian River Lagoon at the Environmental Studies Center, a place you're familiar with. And because the water was so bad, the campers at the camp couldn't go into the water. Instead, they went bowling, and it felt like such an outrage. We live in this beautiful place because of the water, and it felt very personal for me at that time. And then on top of that, I think because of my background in journalism, the more I peeled back the layers of why the system has been corrupted, both in terms of water management and in terms of politics, I became invested in a solution, because once it clicks for you and you learn why we're dealing with what we're dealing with, Lake Okeechobee discharge, like the answer is so obvious. I mean, so I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but definitely personal, and just a feeling of the moral compass could not be pointing in a clearer direction for us.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. I remember when you guys, and you guys meaning the entire TC Palm editorial board, decided to make a column out of the water and the water quality issues that we're facing. And I love that. I love that it was actually like a topic that the entire community could get around, and it was getting such amazing publicity out of it.
That's right. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll chime in on that front.
Yeah.
So this would have been 2016, 2017. And our newsroom, the Stewart News, which is part of the Gannett newspapers in Florida, TC Palm is the website. Our newsroom was shrinking like every other daily newsroom in the United States. We were losing staff. The industry was losing money due to the advent of free online news. So I'm so proud of what we did in those years, because recognizing we were losing journalists, we didn't back off from covering the most important local issues in our community. We doubled down. We got more selective about the topics. We decided we weren't going to cover everything at a shallower, in a shallower manner. We decided we were going to choose the ones that resonated with our community most and double down on them. So water, clean water, the Indian River Lagoon, the St. Lucie River, Lake Okeechobee discharges were at the heart of that. And we created our Indian River Lagoon team, and we nailed it. I'm so proud of the work that we did as a small newsroom at that time. And we had the luck then to have the state Senate president be from Stewart. So we really got his attention, had his ear, and we were able to move the ball forward on some important issues.
What were some of the issues that you were able to get pushed forward with that advocacy?
So that year we had Senate select hearings in Stewart. This would have been 2017, I guess. We had 3 like notoriously bad years in Stewart, Florida: 2013, 2016, and 2018. So if memory serves me right, it was right after the 2016 crisis. So 2017, there were these Senate hearings in Stewart, Florida, held by State Senate President Joe Negron at the time. And experts and policymakers were paraded in. Hundreds of residents showed up and yelled through the microphone to demand change. And keep in mind, for your listeners who don't know, our river was like guacamole green with toxic blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, at that time, or shortly thereafter, before the hearings. And people were scared. They were scared for their health. It wasn't just about not being able to go to the sandbar on a Sunday. It was a legitimate public health concern. It was very scary. Dead marine life washing up on our shores. So those hearings were held, and then Joe Negron also funded a study by University of Florida to figure out how much land needed to be acquired south of Lake Okeechobee, so that Lake Okeechobee water wasn't sent east and west. Instead, it could be cleaned and sent south to the southern Everglades, where we really need it, and Florida Bay. Again, clean water, not dirty water, sent south. So that study was commissioned. I'll never forget talking to Senator Joe Negron at the time. He's like, "Well, how much land do we need?" I'm paraphrasing here. So, well, you're the Senate president. You can fund a study to figure that out. And to his credit, he did. So the study confirmed that we needed tens of thousands of acres more. It was about 60,000 acres more was what was in the study. And that ended up being used to galvanize the public to support a bill, Senate Bill 10 at the time, that was to acquire land to create a reservoir and water treatment, man-made marshes to clean that water south of Lake Okeechobee. So I'm very proud of that progress, although there's a huge asterisk next to it, and that is that the bill was, through the sausage making in Tallahassee, was manipulated, and they removed eminent domain as an option, so only willing sellers could be dealt with. And the sugar industry was not willing to sell their land at that time. So we ended up with this reservoir on a much smaller footprint. It's about 16,500 acres, as opposed to the 60 plus that UF and other scientists believed we needed. So, proud, but I still recognize that there's a lot more work to do. And then one more thing I'll say about that is just the way the community responded was absolutely incredible and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And you're a resident here, so you know that well.
Yeah, it was awesome. It is awesome to see people rallying about something that they care about at all, ever, just people kind of united. But then for something so important and so vital, Martin County, if you look at a map for my listeners, it is all water. Like, it is bisected by a large river, and it goes north and south into a lagoon, and the river continues further west and bisects again. So it is just all water. And so and we are bordered on the east by the Atlantic Ocean. So it's very watery, and it's very important, and it's why we live here, most of us.
Yeah.
So we kind of, in that explanation, which was awesome, we definitely got into like different sects of this Everglades. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of take a big zoom out and explore what the Everglades really is, because it's not just, when people think of the Everglades, if you're not from here, or even if you're not as familiar with the topic, you kind of think of like a swamp somewhere in South Florida. And really, the Everglades is an entire system at one point that made up of the lower third of the state. So it's Kissimmee, which is north of Orlando, and then it flows into the Kissimmee River. And then that goes into Lake Okeechobee, which, listeners, Lake Okeechobee, you can see it in a satellite image. If you look at a picture of Florida, it's the big hole in the middle. And then from Lake O, it overflowed in its banks and then down south to the Everglades. And the Everglades nickname is River of Grass, because it really was just a sheet flow of super shallow water that flowed all the way through the state down into Florida Bay. And then man came along. I mean, it was really kind of pinpointing to a hurricane that and the loss of human lives. So there was a hurricane in the late 1920s that people lost their lives. It was like 2,000 people died. And so the Army Corps stepped in and said the lake cannot overflow like that. People's houses can't flood anymore. So they built an enormous berm around the lake. You can't, if you drive to Lake Okeechobee, you can't actually see the lake. You have to climb up 20 feet to see it. And then, so now it can no longer overflow its banks, but it's instead operated by a system of locks and levees and dams, which break. And then they shunted the water east and west, to the west to the Caloosahatchee River, which has been historically connected to Lake Okeechobee, but in smaller amounts. They just need a little bit of fresh water. And then to the east, where we live, in the St. Lucie River, which has never been connected to Lake Okeechobee, and we don't want or need the fresh water. And what it did was created a throughway through Florida, which I'm sure was part of the plan. You don't have to go around the entire state anymore through the Keys. You can just cut through the middle of the state, which is great for navigation, but it created a whole calamity of issues as far as our water is concerned. So I'm going to let you step in here.
Yeah, you described it well, and we actually just celebrated the 100th year anniversary, if you can call it that, the St. Lucie River being connected to Lake Okeechobee via this canal, the St. Lucie Canal, or the C-44 Canal, as it's also known. It's about 38 miles long. And as you said, it's connected via a series of locks that boats can travel through for navigation, and floodgates that open and close when the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District decide that Lake Okeechobee is too high for public safety concerns, because there are communities around Lake Okeechobee. I'll add that the Herbert Hoover Dike that encircles Lake Okeechobee, I think it's about 700 miles, the perimeter. And it was rehabilitated by the Army Corps of Engineers in recent years to the tune of more than $1 billion. So there is less concern about the integrity of the dike, and the Army Corps is more comfortable holding the lake higher for public safety reasons and flood control reasons. However, it's not great for lake ecology for the lake to be held too high too long, because it's also a world-renowned bass fishery, and there's submerged aquatic vegetation in Lake Okeechobee. So it's this conundrum, of where to send the water in Florida. It's Easter famine, and a really, really important part of this puzzle is south of Lake Okeechobee. There's about 400,000 acres of sugarcane, mainly owned by two companies, and they use the lake for their irrigation, and they get nearly perfect irrigation and drainage. So it's this, the term that we hear a lot is shared adversity. Should St. Lucie have some adversity if Lake Okeechobee's having adversity? And really, you don't see Big Sugar get adversity. They have pretty perfect conditions south of the lake, which, going back to that University of Florida water study, I mean, it's why we still need more land to restore and treat water south of the lake. And then zooming down to the bottom of the system here. And if anyone listening wants to see what we're talking about, you can go to everglades.org and click on Everglades Learning, and you'll see a historic Everglades map and also an altered flow map, and you can see the arrows and which way the water flows. But down at the southern end of the system, to this day, Everglades National Park still doesn't get enough clean freshwater flow. And then south of that, Florida Bay still needs more freshwater flow because they can have hypersaline conditions sometimes that cause algae blooms down there.
So nature had it figured out. Everything was in a perfect water sheet flow balance. And the beauty of water going over land is that it's not going over dirt, it's going over plants. And all these plants filter out this nutrients. And so as it travels over land and over plants, it's just clean, clear, beautiful water at the end. And that's what drops into Florida Bay. And yeah, creates that estuarine environment for seagrasses, because seagrasses don't like it super salty, which is what's happening down there.
Yep.
I want to come back to this in a minute, but I'm really curious, your journalism background, how has that helped you be an advocate for the waterways?
Mm-hmm. So we just summarized at a very high level the problems with the system. And even that is kind of complicated, although when you see the maps, you can get it pretty easily. As you zoom in on different parts of the system and the challenges they face, it is very complicated. Not just the challenges, but the bureaucracies and the rules and regulations and laws that are in place to protect the status quo. So as a journalist, my job was to help people understand complicated issues and also to hold powerful players accountable and really work in the public interest. I think that's ideally what journalism should do. And that's very much what we continue to do at Friends of the Everglades. Explaining is a huge part of my job and our job with our team. We have 8 full-time staff members, so we're relatively small. Explaining what's going on in the system and how it connects to the solutions, and then how the public can act on those solutions. That's at the heart of our work. And it was similar to being a journalist. And now, interestingly, that we all have like StreamYard and digital communications tools, we can publish, right? And we have options in terms of communications that didn't exist when Marjory Stoneman Douglas founded Friends of the Everglades. So it's nice to be able to reach the public in meaningful ways. We get great response One other thing we do is right now legislative session is going on in Tallahassee, and that talk about complicated and fast moving and really dull, if I'm being honest. Like there are bills flying all the time. So we have a legislative accountability program that we fund with a grant from some folks here in the area who really miss a robust journalism sector. And we track bills and we help people understand them. We help them know how to act on them. And a lot of them relate to the problems that we're talking about here. So yeah, it's a different world. And of course, the flip side of that is the bad actors can also publish and present their findings and work against us on these platforms too.
Right. How important is it for the public to be engaged? I know we talk about it a lot, and try to get the word out, but people are inundated all the time with so much information. So how important is it really for people to do something?
It is critically important. And we've seen the results just recently. So I already talked about what happened here in the Stewart area in 2013, 2016, 2018, where the community rose up, the leadership in Tallahassee responded. More recently, just last summer, there was a threat in Florida that some of your listeners may be familiar with to develop state parks, 9 state parks, including here in Martin County. Jonathan Dickinson State Park was proposed for 3 golf courses on scrub habitat that is very valuable. So the community got wind of this thanks to a whistleblower at the Department of Environmental Protection in Tallahassee. And the community absolutely rose up, not just here in Martin County, but beyond. Around Florida, there were rallies, protests, Facebook groups that sprouted up. And so we saw how public awareness led to response. And the day after a rally in downtown Stewart here last August, Governor DeSantis held a press conference about this plan. It was called the Great Outdoors Initiative. They all have like really good sounding names, but it was not great. And he announced that it was half baked and back to the drawing board. And he caved to the public pressure, as he should have. So it's really important for folks. And I know it's hard for the public at large. We all have busy family lives, day jobs that may not relate to the environment like ours do. And it's hard to figure out what your lane is, how to work that lane, and how to engage. But that would be my advice. If anyone listening is grappling with that, like choose your thing. Maybe it's Lake Okeechobee discharges in the Everglades. Maybe it's nuclear power, or maybe it's something else. And just become as expert as you can with the time you have in that lane and engage, because public pressure really, really does work. And one other thing we can do nowadays is, we can make it very easy for people to contact lawmakers, governor's office, with a click of a button. You can send a message, customize a message, and we do that pretty often.
I'm curious, have you gotten feedback from lawmakers on the most effective way for the public to reach out to them, like emails versus phone calls versus like in person? What moves the needle the most, or is there one?
I think all are important and all have a role. Ideally, they're hearing it from all of these channels. Yeah. But I guess a couple of pro tips, if you will, if you're sending a pre-formatted message to a lawmaker, when we do that at Friends of the Everglades, you have the option to customize it. And if you just add even one sentence at the beginning, we've learned that it prevents those messages from going into a filter if the receiving lawmaker has one set. If it's a little different, it won't automatically filter it into this big bucket. It'll separate it as a separate message. You can change the subject lines too. Calls definitely matter, especially if you're calling lawmakers whose districts you live in. So get to know your members of the state House, state Senate, also your representatives in Congress, the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, and call their offices from time to time when you're concerned about something. That definitely matters. And numbers matter, but being in district carries different weight.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had just heard from some lawmakers that the phone call, like the constant ringing of the phone and then the aide having to constantly answer the same thing, really carries a lot of weight. But I mean, if your inbox is clogged with the same issue, then That's
no, I think you're right. The phone calls, there's some conventional wisdom out there that, something like one phone call is equal to like 100 emails or something. I don't know if that's exactly right, but I do think that the calls are noticed, because if lawmakers aren't answering their phones, that's not a good constituent experience.
Sure, that makes sense. So I want to tell a little bit about Marjory Stoneman Douglas's story, because it is part of Friends of the Everglades. She founded it. As you mentioned, she was a journalist and she saw a wrong in her eyes that she wanted to make right. And in this case, was it the airport that really like spurred this whole movement for her?
This is like my favorite topic, so thank you for asking about it. So Marjory was writing for the Miami Herald in the 19-teens and 1920s. And interestingly, she was initially writing about society news, which is typically what women were relegated to do at that time. And she wanted to dig into meatier topics, and she did. And she ended up writing about not just environmental issues, also racial equity issues. She was a suffragist. She wrote about women's right to vote. Incredible woman. And she came to write about the Everglades in a deeper way after her newspaper years, when she was approached by a book publisher publishing the book. It was the series of books called the Rivers of America series. And initially they approached her about writing about the Miami River. And she came back to them, the story goes, and said, well, the Miami River is about an inch long and it's not that interesting. And she got to talking to her scientist friends about the Everglades, which she had already been studying and writing about in her journalism. And she asked her scientist friends if she could legitimately call the Everglades a river of grass. That river of grass as a term had not been used prior to that. And they said, well, yeah, actually, it makes sense scientifically. So she ended up going back to the book publishing company and suggesting River of Grass as part of the Rivers of America series. So the book, The Everglades River of Grass, was published in 1947. And that happened to be the same year that Everglades National Park was dedicated by Harry Truman. Her book became a bestseller. And there was this really heightened public awareness about the Everglades at that time. And she was a huge driving force behind it. I don't want to minimize the knowledge that the indigenous communities in the Everglades already had before Marjory wrote her book. She did change much of the world's perception about the Everglades. She made clear that it wasn't a swampy wasteland to be conquered, that it was a river of grass, a national treasure. The indigenous communities recognize that, and she writes about them in her book in a really meaningful way, I think, especially by 1947 standards. Mm-hmm. The way she presents indigenous voices is powerful and really respects their authority. So from there, she was born in 1890. So 1947, she was 57 years old, published the book. She could have, bestseller. She could have sailed into her retirement years maybe. And instead, in 1969, when the world's largest airport was proposed for what's now Big Cypress National Preserve, she was livid and again went to her group of friends, her collective that she consulted with, and said, how do I stop this? And they said, you need a group. So she founded Friends of the Everglades. And at that time, dues were $1 a year, and she had thousands of members across the state. And Friends of the Everglades really did play a role in defeating the Everglades Jetport, as it was known. It was Richard Nixon was president, and he signed an order barring construction. There was a really important report that came out of scientists working at Everglades National Park at that time too. And we won that battle. Although if you go to a Google Earth now and you look at Google Everglades Jetport or Dade Collier Training Facility, you'll see that one runway was built out there. It's a striking image. So you got this one runway surrounded by Everglades wetlands. And I look at it and I think how much worse it could have been. And also how stupid it was that one runway was built.
It's interesting it hasn't been taken over yet.
Yeah. So the one runway?
Yeah.
By nature, you mean?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is they use it as a training facility. It's called the Dade Collier Training Facility. So it is used for like light aviation, but nothing like what was envisioned. It was actually, I just learned this the other day. That airport, the Everglades Jetport, as envisioned, was going to be bigger than JFK Airport, like many times bigger. And they wanted to use it to land supersonic jets like the Concorde so that people didn't have to hear the sonic booms. I mean, that's pretty problematic for wildlife, sonic booms too. Just a really fascinating story. And so yes, after she founded Friends of the Everglades and had that impact with so many folks who were concerned about the Everglades Jetport, she went on to advocate and really had the ear of governors like Bob Graham, and was a force.
I love that. Thank you for sharing her story.
Yeah, there's so much more, but I
Of course there is. Okay, so bringing it back to the whole KOE system as it's known. One of the things that I like to highlight for people that are not familiar is, again, nature knows what she's doing. And my favorite way of highlighting it is how we try to straighten out the Kissimmee River. So man, in all of its wisdom, said, well, why does this giant river take up all this space, winding slowly back and forth? We'll just straighten it out. I don't know the exact reason why. Maybe more land available, less water. Drain the swamp has been going on in Florida since Florida was incepted. So they straightened Kissimmee River, and it led to a whole host of issues, including excess muck and runoff and pollution into Lake Okeechobee. And so they spent billions of dollars, at least definitely millions, hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars, putting the oxbows and all the wines back into the Kissimmee River, just like nature had it. So that's what we're trying to do, is restore the natural flow of water through the state, which is not a small state.
Right. I know. More than half of the original Everglades watershed has been lost to drainage or development. So we're dealing with the remnants, and that makes the remnants all the more important.
Right. So there's the rallying cry here of send the water south. And we talked a little bit earlier about having land set aside, and it has to be south of Lake Okeechobee. And we've learned it has to be a willing seller. What is the current campaign for that? And I'm going to let you totally take the reins here.
Sure. Yeah. So I talked about what happened in 2016, 2017, 2018, when that state Senate Bill 10, was hamstrung in a way that prevented eminent domain from being used and really shrunk down the footprint of it's called the EAA reservoir, the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir. So you mentioned earlier that if you drive out to Lake Okeechobee, you can't see the lake because of the high embankment walls, the Herbert Hoover Dike around the lake. Well, because we got a smaller footprint, we're going to have a tall, deep reservoir with 37-foot high embankment walls around it. So someday when that reservoir is done being built, you'll see walls when you drive out there too. The problem is you cannot have Everglades restoration unless the water is clean. Water quality is just as important as water quantity. And the EAA reservoir in its current configuration doesn't have enough of a water quality component. So man-made marshes. We know how to do this in Everglades restoration because actually it's been done pretty well. Stormwater treatment areas do an amazing job at taking up nutrients from the water. They require quite a bit of land because they're marshes, they're shallow, and we need more man-made marshes, stormwater treatment areas to get the job done. And we also need, let me back up, the EAA reservoir in its current configuration, assuming it operates as intended, will stop about 50% of the harmful discharges to the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee estuaries and Lake Worth Lagoon. We should mention they get some water volume from the lake too. In order to finish the job, we need much more. So about a year ago at Friends of the Everglades, we set out to answer that question, working with our science and hydrology team. What would it take? How much more land do we still need south of the lake? EA reservoir construction is underway. It's not about stopping the reservoir. It's about how much more do we need to finish the job. So our team, led by Dr. Tom Van Lent, quantified that solution. And we need about 100,000 acres of land, still 102,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee. And about 75% of it would be in a shallow reservoir, and about 25% of it would be stormwater treatment areas to clean that water. If we did that, we could prevent harmful discharges. We could finish the job. So we launched the campaign called Rescue the River of Grass on January 29th to build public awareness around this solution. And we think it's a really opportune time to move this forward for a couple of reasons. Number one, there is funding for it. Back in 2014, Florida voters, 75% of Florida voters approved Amendment 1. It was the Water and Land Legacy Amendment, and it is to fund land acquisition for environmental restoration, for conservation, for the 20 years. So we're halfway through that. It's 2025 now. We're 10, 11 years into the horizon there. And that amendment is bringing in more than $1 billion a year to the state's land acquisition trust fund. So we have this huge pot of money for land acquisition, for restoration in Florida. So it's just a very logical source of funding. Another reason that right now is a really critical time to advance solutions south of Lake Okeechobee is the sugar companies have demonstrated that they're willing to part with sugarcane acreage, at least active cultivation. And we know that because they're actively pitching a rock mining proposal, limestone rock mine proposal in the Everglades agricultural area right now. It's about 8,600 acres. And actually, this is something that we're tracking closely and very concerned about. And if we don't move now to acquire land for restoration, we're going to end up with this patchwork of rock mines and other development south of Lake Okeechobee that will prevent nature from being returned to some semblance of its natural state. And that's just the opposite of what we need to sustain the future of Florida. And the third reason that we really believe now is an important time is climate change is going to present more extreme weather patterns in Florida. We know we're going to need more large-scale areas for water storage, and south of Lake Okeechobee is really the only area in the southern half of Florida that's available for that.
Yeah, Florida is land, but it's just land covered in water is really what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Despite man's best efforts to drain the water from it, there's a quote that always sticks in my mind from actually the late editor of the Stewart News, Ernest Lyons. There's a bridge in Stewart named after him. And he said, "What men do, they can undo." And I just have to repeat that to myself because it can be very daunting. Yeah. But we have done some amazing work in Everglades restoration. That the stormwater treatment areas that have been built are incredible. They are marvels of engineering. They mimic Mother Nature, and that's why they work so well. We just need more of them.
At the Rivers Coalition meeting I saw you at the other week, they were talking about one of the STA's stormwater treatment areas up in Vero and how they're catching like record-breaking bass in these man-made areas because they did such a wonderful job restoring the area. So it can be done. It just takes public initiative and the lawmakers and a willing seller to do something about it.
There's a phrase that's caught on in recent years, nature-based solutions.
Yes.
And that
it's my husband's favorite saying.
Okay, perfect. So I like him. It just makes so much sense to work as closely with Mother Nature as possible instead of defying nature with an over-engineered solution. Some engineering is necessary. Don't get me wrong. Like the stormwater treatment areas are marvels of engineering, but they work with nature.
Yes, absolutely. So do you know the market value, and this is getting a little nitty gritty, but like the market value of 102,000 acres of like where we would actually need it? How much money do we actually need?
Yes, we have analyzed the property appraiser data for that area south of Lake Okeechobee, and the area in the southern end of the Everglades agricultural area is valued like between $5,000 and $10,000 an acre, according to property appraiser data, which, if anyone's looked up their own house on property appraiser websites, sometimes the market value is higher than that. But let's just start with that. So then we're talking $500 million to $1 billion for land acquisition. So Huge number, right? But remember, I said more
But
than
we're
$1
getting it.
billion a year is coming in through Amendment 1. It's really like 1.2 to 1.6 billion a year for the next 10 years. So money is available to acquire that land for sure. Even if it was double that, 1 to 2 billion, we would still have funds to acquire it.
It's exciting.
It is, and we think, we need willing sellers at the table. And one point of clarification, while Senate Bill 10 precluded eminent domain from being used, because what we're contemplating is separate from that reservoir, eminent domain is a possible legal option. I don't know if it's politically palatable, but I think it's important to recognize that it could be used if state or even federal officials, federal eminent domain, that's how we got Big Cypress National Preserve, So anyway.
Okay. I was going to say, is there an example of how eminent domain has worked? And so how did Big Cypress become Big Cypress then?
Yeah, so federal eminent domain played a role, and I confess I have not studied all the details of that history. But remember, I mentioned scientists at Everglades National Park writing a report that helped stop the jet port from being built. Mm-hmm. They also wrote a report on the importance of Big Cypress National Preserve and saving that space. It was really important in that it established how Big Cypress was some of the most protected swaths of Everglades out there, in some ways more so than Everglades National Park. So yeah, after that report was published, then there was appetite in DC to create the National Preserve, and this was a different time, and it was, think about what was going on in the country in like the early 1970s. You had the first Earth Day, you had Richard Nixon wanting to get reelected and out of self-preservation, embracing some environmental policies. And the Cuyahoga River in Ohio was on fire. You had the Clean Water Act, you had the Clean Air Act, and you had people like Nathaniel Reed, who lived here in Martin County, working at the Department of Interior and pushing to get these deals done. And his leadership was really instrumental. And I will now read up on exactly how the federal domain part plugged in there, because it'd be instructive.
Be interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good point, though. It's always a similar vein because it's all Florida and water. But current legislative session, there are two bills, one in the Senate and one in the House, that are being pushed through that erode away the comprehensive plans, or the local rule over comprehensive plans, and make it easier for development. Would you speak to why this would be a problem?
I'll say we've seen attempts by Tallahassee every single session since I've been in this job. So that's 5 years. And before that, in my journalism days too, to erode the power of local governments to maintain responsible growth in their communities to the extent they still have it. And here in Martin County, we're so incredibly lucky to have a long history of responsible growth. There's an effort to preempt home rule by Tallahassee, and they have unfortunately been successful in some cases. It's much more risky for citizens to bring a challenge to a comprehensive plan amendment these days, because you can be on the hook for attorney's fees if you lose. And there's efforts now with this bill that you just referenced, and a bill 1118 is the Senate version of it, called Land Use and Development Regulations, and it would allow development of agricultural enclaves to bypass traditional zoning laws. And we could be looking at really concerning growth outside of urban boundaries in counties across Florida if this advances. And then it also outlaws referendums on density and urban boundary lines. So there's just such hypocrisy woven into these kinds of bills, because again, we hear from Tallahassee that the government closest to the people is the best government, and then year after year they try to take power away from locals. One other way they've tried to do that is with wetlands protections. Last year there was a bill to preempt local governments from setting wetland buffers, setbacks from wetlands for construction, that were more stringent than the states. So luckily that bill did not pass. And we end up playing a lot of defense on bills like this. I think for at least 3 years now, we've been calling what's happened in Tallahassee the session of sprawl. And we just know people of Florida do not want this. We see it in our communities. Nobody likes traffic. Nobody likes sprawl as far as the eye can see. Everybody likes clean water.
Right. We need to have lawmakers that listen or get better people in.
Yeah, part of the problem is lobbying. The industries that push for these kinds of bills stand to gain from them, and they have armies of lobbyists, as does the sugar industry in Tallahassee. So that's where, getting back to your good point about public involvement, when we can be organized and have a collective voice and be effective in our lanes, then we can be a counter to this lobbying that is really powerful in Tallahassee.
Yeah. Really quick, I want to clarify the importance of the urban service boundary in case listeners aren't aware. So, at least in Florida, I don't know about other states, we are required to have a comprehensive growth plan. And in it, we have an urban service boundary. And all that means is on here in Martin County, like, as an example, we have western lands that are used for agriculture. And then inside the urban service boundary, that's where all of like our water and utilities are dedicated by the county, and that's where more densely populated areas of people are supposed to be. And it's important to stay inside of it for several reasons. One, straight economics. You venture outside of it, now you have to get all these utilities outside of the urban service boundary, and it costs taxpayers money, millions in money to do that. And two, the more you develop the land, the less land there is to preserve for wildlife and water flow. Just wanted to kind of highlight that a little bit. How do you keep hope? Because there's just a lot. There's a lot to keep track of. There's a lot to be concerned about. What are your methods?
Getting into nature, 100%. Yes, I just had a few days off last week, and I went to Wakota-Hatchie Wetlands and near Delray Beach, Western Palm Beach County. It's actually man-made by Palm Beach County. Incredible nesting wood storks, and I just soaked it all in. So getting into nature is a really important part of that, and getting on the water as much as possible. I often think about Marjory Stoneman Douglas's life and legacy, not just in terms of the incredible victories she achieved, but also the setbacks and the hard times she lived through. So, this woman was born in 1890, so she lived through World War I, Great Depression, World War II, Vietnam War. Right. She also was open, at least later in her life, about her own mental health struggles. She didn't have an easy life, and yet she kept pushing forward, and her legacy honestly gives me incredible strength. There's a great autobiography she wrote with a journalist, John Rothschild. It's called Voice of the River, and it really gets at who she was. So those things give me hope, and just the wins we get give me hope. The success we had on the state parks bill, and we're still pushing now to get some protective legislation advanced so we don't have those state parks threats again. But seeing the will of the people responded to gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you. Yes, and it's important to keep that.
Yes, yes it is.
At the end of each episode, I have a series of questions that I like to ask. What, if you were given a blank check, unlimited sums of money for any project or projects up to 3, what would you use the money for? Well,
I would definitely want to buy the land for Rescue River. 102,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee for restoration, but it's not turned into rock mines, and it could serve the greater good. So, yeah, a couple $1 billion would be nice for that. And fortunately, we have the state funding there, so I don't even need a blank check, an imaginary blank check, but that would be it.
What is your favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could be a day where things went right, everything was working in your favor, or it could be a day where, things happened and it makes a really great story now, secondhand fun.
Yeah, I'll tell one quick one that was a great day, one that was a little bit of a snafu. So I often think about a trip I took out to the stormwater treatment areas that do exist south of Lake Okeechobee now. And this trip was facilitated by Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch, who used to be on the governing board of the Water Management District. And we went with Maggie Herchala, who was an iconic county commissioner who is the reason we have such wonderful growth protections in Martin County. And a few others of us went out there. And the Water Management District took us on the water in these stormwater treatment areas, these man-made marshes. We have about 60,000 acres of them south of Lake O. They've been built to clean sugarcane runoff, like at the taxpayer expense. They work, they're great. Wish sugar had paid for them, but nonetheless, they were. And being out there, seeing how we have recreated the Everglades with these two smart, strong-willed women who really believed in our environment. Maggie has since passed away. Jackie still very much keeps her finger on the pulse. And seeing how it could be done gave me a lot of hope, to your point. And also, it was eye-opening in terms of the intense work it takes, not just to build these things, but to maintain them. When I was out there, there were workers and waiters planting bulrush, some of the vegetation to uptake nutrients. And then there was also some riprap in one part of the STA we were in. And that was because there had been a short circuit where the water had kind of busted through some of the vegetation, some of the cells. So really interesting to see how they adapted, the Water Management District adapted and was addressing the challenges there. So that was a great day, and I have it in my mind's eye whenever I think about STAs. One little not so great day, although it ended up being great anyway, was in the South Fork of the St. Lucie River. Our staff at Friends of the Everglades tries to get out once a month to just reconnect with the nature we're working to save. We try to get out together. And on a small boat south of the St. Lucie River with our team, and the motor stopped running. So we were way down the South Fork, like deep in Halpatioke Park. And luckily things were repaired before too much time went on. But it's always, everybody who spends time on the water has a story like that.
Yes. That's funny.
Yeah.
I'm glad you were able to get it repaired. Yeah. All right. At the end of each episode, I like to leave the audience with a conservation ask to go forth and bring into the world. What would you like my audience to take from your episode today?
So first of all, thank you to everyone who's listening to this podcast for your interest in environmental careers. We need you. Please do not let what's happening in politics, either at the state or national level, deter you. We need you more than ever. So I'll start with that. And my ask would be to join the Rescue the River of Grass movement. Go to everglades.org or everglades.org/rescue and read about this initiative to finish the job, to purchase the land we still need south of Lake Okeechobee for restoration, to reconnect the river of grass, as Marjory coined it. We have a really clear, strong case to be made right now. And we've had about 13,000 people sign that petition so far, which is incredible since we just launched less than 2 months ago. And we need more folks to understand and add their voice to this movement. It's an opportune time, and the future of Florida arguably depends on it. There's a great saying that I think about often, and it's saving the Everglades is a test. If we pass, we may get to keep the planet. And what happens in the Everglades is going to be an indicator of our future ability to adapt and survive on this planet. And we can do it if we act right now with some urgency. So please check out everglades.org/rescue, add your name to the petition.
Perfect. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
If listeners want to find you, connect with you, learn more about you and or Friends of the Everglades, where's the best place to do so?
Yep. Go to everglades.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky. And you can also email info@everglades.org if you have a question or just want to know how you can get involved. We have a volunteer sign-up form on our website too. We're always looking for volunteers to help us in different ways, whether tabling at community events or helping us rally folks to show up for a protest or to call lawmakers. So lots of different ways to get involved, and some of them can be done from the comfort of your home.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Eve, so much for all that you do for the Everglades in Florida, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Hey, has the ocean caught you in her net of wonder? Are you looking to be more involved without an expensive degree or career change? I've got you covered. Download my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree, and discover practical and fun ways to dive into science, make connections, and create your ocean journey starting today. Click the link in the show notes or visit my website, Cara Grace Muzia, that's KaraGraceMuzia.com, to get your copy today. Again, link in the show notes or visit my website, and let's dive in. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at KaraGraceMuzia.com. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and, of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for creating a life of purpose and meaning, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at KaraGraceMuzia.com and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.